Hello ladies and gentlemen, Arthur here again, and today we're going to dive into keyword let, which is another way of declaring variable, and main focus for today will be let versus var, because basically on the first glance these are two very similar ways of declaring a variable, but there are a couple of things that we need to cover to understand why let is actually let's say better, because it's designed to be a replacement. In two words, what let is, it's basically a replacement for var, as I mentioned, and it has introduced more restrictions to how you declare and how you use your variables, because var previously was very kind of vague and very kind of too flexible, let's say. But I will show this in examples very shortly. And in the end of this video, I will also give you a pro tip as usual. So let's dive into let versus var tab right now. So a couple of things that has been changed was introduction of the let. And one of those is redeclaration. So redeclaration is basically when you created a variable and then you want to create it again. It's not about changing value, it's about actually redeclaring same variable with the same name. Okay, so let's see what happens when you do this with var. Okay, so if you do redeclaration with var, as you can see, it just works. There is no syntax errors, nothing in the console, so it just allows you to do this. Okay, so you have created var a with number 1 as a value, and then you redeclare the same variable, so you've wiped out the first one and created another a variable with number 2 as a value. But what happens when you do this with let is you're going to have a syntax error, as you can see, because identifier B has been already declared. And this is good because basically what it gives us is a bit more security around your variable names. If you think about it and imagine a huge project where you have like hundreds of JavaScript files and you will be redeclaring same variables in multiple files, you will have a mess where you will not be able to actually understand on which scope which variable you have redeclared and why the hell the value changed of this variable. So with let you will have this problem gone, because basically you will not be able to redeclare the same variable on the same level. And in terms of scoping, don't worry, we will cover this in a second as well. So that's what about the redeclaration. So basically with let, when you declare variables with let, it registers name on the one layer, on one scope layer once. Basically you can't redeclare. You can change the value, you can mutate it because it's a variable, but you can't redeclare the same variable name. Okay, so next thing is hoisting. Hoisting is a fancy word which you may not be aware of, so I will try to explain it very quickly. So JavaScript renders your script in a very peculiar way. So initially it feels like a very sensible way, because it reads your scripts from top to bottom. So basically, if you think about it, you have like many of your JavaScript files, and you when you compile these, basically JavaScript engine stacks them all one underneath another one, and then it reads them basically from top to bottom. But what happens is a couple of instructions are basically kind of moving parts in your script on compilation stage basically. And when you declare variables with keyword var, all the variable declarations goes at the very top. So without values, it just the variable names, they all go up to the very top of your big compilation kind of script, if you like. And what this leads us to is that you will have all the variables declared in advance before your script has been even run, and then at the stage where you actually declare your variable in your script, the value will be assigned to already declared variable. So there are a couple of issues for this. With this is, first of all, if you don't use these variables in a certain parts of your script, they will still be declared, which basically leads to a leak of memory because you declare these variables within slots of your memory on your PC basically. So all the variables declared with var will always be declared even if you don't use them. And also this leads to some confusions when you're developing, and I will show you what that means. So basically, imagine we have variable c being used before it actually declared. So, and this is totally fine. So, okay, hold on, we need to fix this. So as you can see, I can use variable c even before it has been declared. So that's why it proves basically what I just told you. So with var c, with keyword var, variable c has been moved to the very top. So declaration of your variable has been moved to the very, very top of your compilation list of the script. And only after that, when compilator hit this line 12, when you use it, it will assign a value to it. But declaration has been done earlier on. And if we will use variable c here, you will see the value. So it's undefined, then you declare it with value, and then it has its value basically. And that's a little bit confusing, as well as it's not very efficient, because basically as many var variable you have there, as many declarations all the time you will have in your PC memory basically. And the good thing with let is that it basically avoids this. So if we will do the same test with let, as you can see, you can't use d before it has been declared, which means JavaScript, when it reads your scripts on compilation stage, it declares and assigns a value to let variables at the same time where they exist in the script. Okay, so it's not possible to use these variables before they've been declared, and they will not leak into your memory basically of your machine before they've been used basically. Okay, so that's what is hoisting and what it's all about basically. Okay, now let's take a look into scoping rules, which is another issue developers has faced with using var keyword to define variables, because when you define variables with keyword var, unfortunately all the variables are becoming global. So basically you can access them from everywhere, and you can declare and redeclare and reassign them everywhere. So it's basically a chaos, which is quite hard to maintain and understand where things are coming from, especially when you have like a big project. In our examples, obviously we're using quite simple, very narrowed examples, but in a big code basis it's quite big problem if you use var all around. So let's take a look. You are not very familiar with scope, but that's okay. You will probably understand it a little bit better after this explanation. But in general, it's basically like you have global scope, which is your file, and then with different constructions like if statement or loops, etc., or functions, you can create scopes basically. And within this scope, there is like it's like a room where some stuff can happen, and then there is a visibility to a degree from outside and inside basically. I will show you that in a second. So on the global level, on the global scope, we can create a couple of variables like E and F with some values, and then we can create a scope with if statements. So this is a scope. Okay, so this is now inside of the global scope we have if statement scope. And I've put a true here just for the purposes of this demo, so that we always get inside of this if statement. And if I uncomment these two, as you can see, nothing really happens. So oh, hold on. Do we have? Oh yeah, we have an error here. Sorry, that's what it is. So as you can see, from the global scope, stuff is leaking into inner scopes like if statement scope. If we will create another scope inside of if statement, it will, all this data will leak through all the inner scopes basically. But if you declare something inside of the scope, you would imagine this to stay there and not leak to a parent scope, to the global scope, or to a parent scope, which may be another if statement, for example. And what happens with var is, as I mentioned, var is always a global declaration of the variable. And if we declare variable with keyword var inside of the scope, we will still be able to use this variable outside. And this means if we summarize all the above issues, you will have even more problems and potential bugs, because you can use the same variable from the scope in the global scope with all these hoisting issues and redeclaration issues, etc., etc. So if you would declare this variable over here, like var g, outside of the scope, if statement scope, and then declare it here, you would override this variable, which is not really good. So this may cause some bugs and confusions in reading your code. So what let gives us, it's basically when it basically scopes variables that you declare. So if you declare let h, variable h, equal 3 inside of the if statement, it will belong only to the if statement. Okay, so and if we try to use it outside of the if statement, which is outside of the if statement scope, it will not be defined. So it basically doesn't exist. But if we're going to use it inside, it will exist. And what's interesting, like on top of our previous examples, you can declare this h variable outside. Okay, so and these will be two different h variables. One is for this scope over here, for if statement scope, and the other one is for global scope. Okay, and that's totally normal, and this is good because it basically avoids bugs that you can potentially have with not managing scope really well manually in your mind. So that's what it is basically. Okay, so I will comment this out because this will cause errors further down. And very quickly, one last thing that I want to mention is this bit here. But in order to show you this demo, I need to switch my IDE to the browser. So in browser, we have window object, which is a global object of the window of the preview in your browser that you can use for certain things. So when you load the page itself the window, the preview of the page is a global object in JavaScript. So in order to show you this, I will copy this code into my Chrome console. You can do this as well on your Chrome if you like. So what are we doing here is we're just declaring two variables, surname and name, but we are using different keywords, var and let. And then we are console logging surname and name on the window global object, which is basically this preview here. Okay. And what happens is that with var, as you can see, the surname has been attached to a global window object, and name didn't, which is good because you're not polluting this window object with all your variables. So last thing that I have to cover is pro tip. So it's very simple in this case. So I mean, you probably already realized from the tutorial in general that it's probably will be always good to use let instead of var. Okay, so The reason behind it is if you didn't kind of get all the benefits at the moment from this tutorial, but the benefits are that let gives you more control over certain things like scoping, declarations, redeclarations, and stuff like that. So it will minimize risks of bugs and confusions, and it will increase readability of your code as well. It will force you to write more meaningless names for your variables, etc., because you will have to redeclare different variables rather than using the same variable in multiple places by just redeclaring it or changing its name, which will basically be very confusing for other developers and yourself when you will look to your code like in a month or two. So it's definitely suggested to always use let for variables that are mutable if you have mutable stuff. So that's basically it, guys. So as usual, comment, like, and subscribe, and yeah, see you in the next video. Bye.